What happened? Thank you. I worked on the tie. Charlie Sheen had some issues with it yesterday. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. It's another busy day here at the White House and across the Trump administration. The first jobs report under the president's administration was released this morning. It's National Wear Red Day, highlighting the importance of preventing heart disease. It's National Catholic Schools Week, and the president's going to be signing some executive orders delivering some much-needed regulatory relief to lenders and borrowers in the next few minutes. We're finishing up the second week here really strong. Yesterday was another great deal was reached with Lockheed Martin for the purchase of a new lot of F-35s. Through the president's intervention, a total of 90 planes, for a lot of 90 planes, 55 were purchased for U.S. military that added up to a total of $455 million savings for U.S. taxpayers from the previous lot, with an average cost reduction of 7.5%. Another big win that the president has delivered on for U.S. taxpayers. Speaking of good numbers, let's turn to the jobs report. The economy added more than 227,000 new jobs, significantly more than the 175,000 that had been expected. Today's report reflects the consumer confidence that the Trump presidency has inspired. According to a recent Gallup poll, economic confidence is at a new high, and ADP showed strong private sector hiring. President Trump campaigned on how to make America work again. Even before he took office, the markets knew he would deliver on that promise. The president's already taken significant steps to turn our economy around, and he's looking forward to ensuring that every American who wants a job has the opportunity to find one. While the president's definitely pleased that the job growth has far surpassed expectations and that the labor force participation is rising, he also recognizes that there's a lot more work to be done. The president has a big and bold agenda to grow the U.S. economy and to create jobs. In just his first 2 weeks in office, he's met with more than 50 business leaders across a vast range of industries. This morning, the president participated in a strategic and policy forum with business leaders from some of our country's most successful companies. The president understands the importance of an open dialogue with fellow business leaders on how to make the nation's economy stronger. His firsthand experience as a successful businessman helps to guide his decisions as president, and he will continue to seek opinions of other job creators while crafting an economic agenda. All of these meetings are focused on one primary goal: providing new and improved employment opportunities for all Americans. We're looking at a full range of policy measures to achieve that goal: regulatory relief, tax and trade reform, empowering women in the workplace, rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure, and improving our education system. Also today, in pursuit of that goal, the president will be signing 2 executive actions as part of his plan to overhaul our financial and regulatory system. I expect that to happen closer to the 1 o'clock hour. The first is an executive order proposing guideline principles that sets the table for a regulatory system that mitigates risk, encourages growth, and more importantly, protects consumers. The Dodd-Frank Act is a disastrous policy that's hindering our markets, reducing the availability of credit, and crippling our economy's ability to grow and create jobs. It imposed hundreds of new regulations on financial institutions while establishing unaccountable and unconstitutional a new agency that does not adequately protect consumers. Perhaps worst of all, despite all of its overreaching, Dodd-Frank did not address the causes of the financial crisis, something we all know must be done. It did not solve the too big to fail, and we must determine conclusively that the failure of a large bank will never again leave taxpayers on the hook. The presidential memorandum addresses the burdensome government regulations in the Department of Labor's fiduciary rule. The rule is a solution in search of a problem. There are better ways to protect investors, and the Trump administration is taking action to do so. We're directing the Department of Labor to review this rule. The rule's intent may be to have provided retirees and others with better financial advice, but in reality, its effect has been to limit the financial services that are available to them. President Trump does not intend to put unnecessary limits on economic opportunity. The Department of Labor exceeded its authority with this rule, and this is exactly the kind of government regulatory overreach the president was put in office to stop. We desperately need to overhaul how we approach financial regulation. The president is taking action to protect American taxpayers and get people back to work. Moving on, we announced earlier in this week that we would be taking steps to address Iran's recent actions. Today, the U.S. sanctioned 25 individuals and entities that provide support to Iran's ballistic missile program and the Islamic Revolutionary Quds Force. These designations are in response to Iran's ongoing ballistic missile program, including its ballistic missile test on January 29, 2017, as well as Iran's continued support for terrorism. We've taken these actions today after careful consideration and will continue to respond with appropriate action. These designations mark yet another stop in our continued effort to aggressively target Iran's ballistic missile program and terrorism-related activities. Over at the Department of Defense, Secretary Mattis is on a final day of a 2-day trip through Asia. He visited Korea yesterday and Japan today, returning to Washington tomorrow. Secretary Mattis' visit emphasizes the priority President Trump places on the Asia-Pacific and on strengthening the U.S. Republic of Korea alliance in the face of a growing North Korea nuclear and ballistic missile threat. In the Senate, the President now has 11 cabinet nominees waiting a full Senate vote on their confirmations. We look forward to welcoming these individuals into the administration. Regarding the weekend's plans, the President will debut his second weekly Facebook Live event this evening at 5 o'clock. You can expect him to recap another week of action on behalf of the American people. He'll also comment on his selection of Judge Neil Gorsuch to be the next Associate Judge of the Supreme Court. And while recognizing Black History Month, he will discuss his vision to deliver more opportunity and safety for the African-American community. One more note of this week's address. The lead-in to the President's remark on Facebook Live will feature some of the incredible artwork throughout the White House that was created by African-American artists, so you definitely don't want to miss this. As I mentioned previously, this weekend the President will be shifting the operation of the White House down to the Winter White House at Mar-a-Lago. While in Florida, he'll hold meetings and calls with advisors and staff to plan for another big week of action on behalf of the American people. We'll provide readouts of these as they occur. By our count, as of this morning, the administration has already racked up more than 60 significant actions, 21 executive actions, 16 meetings with foreign leaders, and 10 stakeholder meetings, to name a few. We're looking at another productive week next week. On Monday, the President will visit Central Command and Special Operations Command headquarters at MacDill Air Force Base. While at MacDill, the President will receive command briefings from both CENTCOM and SOCOM, have lunch with the enlisted troops, and have an all-hands address to personnel. General Dunford and General Flynn will also be present for the meetings, and the President will return to Washington that evening. With that, I'm going to go to my first Skype question seat, Jackie Nesbral from NBC6 in South Florida. Jackie.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the viewers of South Florida, thanks so much for this opportunity. You know, a lot of focus on foreign affairs this week and new sanctions announced today against Iran. And of course, Miami, as you know, is home to the largest Cuban-American community in the country. And during the campaign, President Trump talked about his discontent with the warming of U.S.-Cuba relations implemented by President Obama. And in the last days of his administration, he ended the wet foot, dry foot policy, leaving thousands of Cubans in limbo. So my question is twofold. A, has there been any contact between your administration and the Cuban government? And B, are there any plans to change the current policy right now?
Thanks, Jackie. We are in the midst of a full review of all U.S. policies towards Cuba. The President is committed to an agenda of ensuring human rights for all citizens throughout the world. And as we review those policies in Cuba, that will be forefront in their policy discussions, but there's nothing that we have on that front at this point. Francesca Chambers.
Thank you, Sean. Today, the United States put new sanctions on Iran. Previously, this morning, the President had said that they were playing with fire. You said that appropriate actions would continue to be taken. Is this the full extent of the punishing actions that we're seeing right now? And are military options still on the table in response to the administration saying that all options are on the table?
Thanks for the question. I think one of the things that the President has said throughout the campaign during the transition and since becoming President is that he doesn't like to telegraph his options. That's how he believes that you can have a much greater successful option. So I'm not going to go into the full extent. I think today's sanctions really represent a very, very strong stand against the actions that Iran has been taking and make it very clear that the deal that they struck previously was not in the best interest of this country, and that President Trump is going to do everything he can to make sure that Iran has stayed in check.
So it is possible that there are more actions coming, though.
I would never rule anything off the table. I think the President's made it clear throughout his time that that's what's going to happen. Jeff. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Sean. I wanted to ask about one of the members that has been announced as being part of President Trump's team. It's Gina Haspel. Senator Ron Wyden has written to the president saying that her background makes her unsuitable to be the CIA deputy director. And what he was specifically referencing was her role in the enhanced interrogation program that the CIA had during the course of the Bush administration. Do you believe that this background is a disqualifier for that position?
I think she has had an unbelievably distinguished career as a covert operative. She basically gave up that to come out and serve in this role at the request of Director Pompeo. And I think she has been a very, very distinguished servant to the American people and is highly qualified for that position. Next, I'm going to go to Jock McKelvin over at WMUR in New Hampshire. Josh.
Hey, Sean. Sean, thanks for taking the question. I know you're looking forward to the Patriots coming down in a couple of months. A lot of people up here are hoping that happens as well. Getting to business, though, for more than 2 years, the #1 public health and safety threat facing the state is the heroin and opioid crisis. During the campaign, the president promised to be swift and aggressive when it came to this problem, stopping the flow of drugs coming across the border. Increasingly, though, the problem lies in synthetic fentanyl that's being cooked up in labs in the Northeast. What is the administration doing on that front, as well as the treatment aspect of addiction? And secondly, if I may, with the understanding it is a state issue, New Hampshire is poised to become a right-to-work state, but the vote is expected to be close. Given the administration's favorable view of right to work, is it actively engaged in that effort? And if not, what is the general message from the White House?
Thanks, Josh. First, on the opioid crisis, that is a major problem for not just New Hampshire, but for so many states across the country. I think one of the things beyond the health issue is to make sure that we're looking at border issues. And the flow of heroin through our southern border is something that the president obviously takes. That's part of his whole strong immigration stance, strong border security. Having that wall built, having additional assets on the southern border will go a long way to stem the flow of illegal drugs into the country from our southern border up through the states. It was obviously, as you mentioned, a big issue that he made in New Hampshire throughout the primary and continued so in the campaign. And that's going to be something that as soon as Tom Price and others are confirmed throughout the department, this has got a health component to it. It's got a border issue to it. So there is a multi-government approach that needs to be taken to the opioid crisis. With respect to right to work, I think you accurately portrayed it. The president believes in right to work. He wants to give workers and companies the flexibility to do what's in the best interest for job creators. Obviously, the vice president has been a champion of this as well. It's something that is a big deal in Indiana and something that he has championed as well. Blake.
John, I want to ask you about Dodd-Frank.
Yeah.
Beyond the executive order that's going to be signed here momentarily, is the administration planning on or working with Congress to overturn certain portions of the law itself that can't be done with an executive order? If so, what might that be? What might that timeline be? And can you say if a full repeal of Dodd-Frank is actively being considered or not?
Well, I think there's two aspects of this. There's the administrative piece, which he's starting to address through executive action, and then there's the legislative piece that I think we're going to work with Congress on. But I mean, I think I'd go back to what I said earlier, that Dodd-Frank has been both a disaster in terms of the impact that it's had, but also it hasn't achieved the goal. And I think that there's no question that the president talked about this extensively, the impact that it's had, and it's not an either or. It's frankly just not doing what it set out to do. And so I think we're going to continue not just to act through administrative action, but through working with Congress and figure out a legislative fix. Major Garrett.
Sean, the meeting with the Australian ambassador here yesterday was Chief of Staff Priebus and Steve Bannon. Can you describe what that meeting was about, and did the administration make a commitment, which we heard from the State Department yesterday, that in fact all of those subject to the Obama administration agreement are still possible refugee resettlers, just with extreme vetting or some sort of process? What was communicated? And on the Iran sanctions, Adam Zubin is the acting Treasury Secretary. He was, of course, in charge of sanctions at the Treasury Department before. Oftentimes, these are a long time in development. Were these sanctions something that were kind of on his desk or had been identified, and that's what made them so, if not easy, available to enact so rapidly?
Yeah, I think those are. I think you correctly pointed out. I mean, he served in the last administration. These kind of sanctions don't happen quickly, but I think the timing of them was clearly in reaction to what we've seen over the last couple days. We knew we had these options available to us because they had been worked through the process, but we acted swiftly and decisively today because the timing was right. So, they were in the pipeline, they had been staffed and approved, and the president made the decision that now was the time to do it based on recent action. And I'm sorry, and on the, look, Chief of Staff Priebus and Chief Strategist Bannon did meet with the Prime Minister yesterday. I think they had a very productive, the ambassador, thank you, appreciate the correction. They did have a very productive and candid conversation. We have a tremendous amount of respect for the people of Australia, for Prime Minister Trumbull, and it was a follow-up on the call, but we're going to continue to work through this. We're going to honor the commitments that we've made in some way, meaning that we are going to vet these people in accordance with the agreement that happened, and we'll continue to have further updates as we do. John Roberts.
Sean, your statement last night on settlements in Israel.
Yeah.
Has there been a shift in U.S. policy? While you said that you didn't think that they were helpful to achieving peace,
Right.
you also didn't think that they were an impediment to peace, which would represent a departure for both Obama and Bush. And there was no reaffirmation of a two-state solution in that statement. So where are you on that?
The president's committed to peace. That's his goal. And I think when the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu meet here on the 15th, that will obviously be the topic on that. At the end of the day, the goal is peace. And I think that's what you have to